Be informed. Be guided. Be inspired. As Hector Macalalag Leadership Channel proudly presents review sessions for Principals Swain and DMT.
Isang mapagpalang araw sa inyong lahat. A blessed day to all of you. Welcome to another episode of the National Qualifying Examination for School Heads or the Principals Test Review 2021. Friends, this is my 14th video which has the topic about Principals Test Review. And 14 really is the lucky number because this is DepEd Order number 14, series of 2021. Wow! We are full of 14. Parang February 14, love. But this guidelines is very, very important considering that there is a certain DepEd Order that is also rescinded and suspended because of this DepEd Order. So I think this is very crucial in terms of the domain on managing school operations and resources, as well as this basic knowledge should be inculcated in the minds of the school heads, considering that the title of our discussion for today is all about guidelines on the cancellation or suspension of classes and work in government offices due to typhoons, flooding, other weather disturbances, and calamities. Ito po ang inyong lingkod, Hector Dinarcia Macalalag, PhD, Seso 6. Wow! Ang sarap pakinggan ng bagong title. But I am very thankful to Almighty Father for this blessing. Sana po sa mga manunood, wag nyo pong i-skip ang ads. That is the only favor that you can give me. Hindi naman ako after sa monetary considerations, but just a small favor so that the maintenance of this channel will continue and I can serve more and I can reach more people and I can inspire more. So, marami-rami din yung ads. Sana pagtsagaan ninyong wag i-skip. Kaya magsisimula na tayo. The rationale of this DepEd Order. The cancellation or suspension of classes and work in the Department of Education or DepEd due to typhoons, flooding, other weather disturbances, and calamities is governed by Executive Order number 66, series of 2012, titled Prescribing Rules on the Cancellation or Suspension of Classes and Work in the Government Offices due to typhoons, flooding, and other weather disturbances and calamities as operationalized by DepEd Order number 43, series of 2012. So ito yung sinasabi kong DepEd Order na suspended at rescinded dahil sa DepEd Order na ito. This is titled Guidelines on the Implementation of Executive Order number 66 by Safeguarding Learners and Personnel from Unnecessary Physical Dangers that they may be exposed to. These policies protect their constitutional rights to life, health, safety, and property in times of calamities. That's why this DepEd Order is based on those executive order and as well as the previous DepEd Order from 2012. In its commitment to ensure teaching and learning continuity while looking after the health, safety, and well-being of its learners, teachers, and personnel, the Department of Education issued DepEd Order number 12 Series of 2020, this is last year, entitled Adoption of the Basic Education Learning Continuity Plan, or the BE-LCP, for school year 2020-2021 in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. DepEd has also issued DepEd Order number 11, series of 2020, entitled The Revised Guidelines on Alternative Work Arrangements in the Department of Education during the state of national emergency due to COVID-19 pandemic. So itong mga DepEd order na ito, yung about sa LCP, are being issued also because of this pandemic. And the guidelines on the alternative work arrangement is also embodied in DepEd Order number 11, series of 2020. So, those DepEd Order are very important for this DepEd Order also. Those are the bases, that's why this DepEd Order is being implemented. Through these policies, the department has adopted distance learning modalities and alternative work arrangements which minimize the health and safety risks brought about not only by the pandemic but also by typhoons, flooding, and other weather disturbances that learners and teachers might be exposed to. So through these policies that the department really is doing something for the benefit of our learners as well as our personnel in the Department of Education. In addition to these policies, the department recognizes that the suspension of classes and work during emergencies remain to be necessary in upholding physical and mental well-being. Thus, the application of DepEd Order number 43, series of 2012, is suspended until further notice, and it displays these guidelines on the cancellation or suspension of classes and work in government offices due to typhoons, flooding, other weather disturbances, and calamities are being adopted. Ano ang difference ng DepEd Order number 43, series of 2012, at sa DepEd Order na ito? Kasi there is a provision on that DepEd Order number 43, series of 2012, na the employees may leave their stations. So, ibig sabihin, parang it is implied na nandun na sila, pwede lang pumunta sila, pwede silang umuwi. And then, dito sa DepEd Order na ito, talagang it is clearly stated na hindi na sila mag-report in case of emergencies and calamities. And as we go on, we'll know the differences of the two DepEd Order. That's why this DepEd Order number 43, series of 2012, is hereby suspended until further notice because of this new normal and because of this pandemic. That's why this DepEd Order is applicable today. Scope. The DepEd Order, the application of DepEd Order is suspended until further notice. In its place, the following guidelines shall be observed by all concerned central, regional, division, and school officials and personnel and parents and guardians for both public and private schools, as well as communities learning centers. So, hindi lang po para ito sa public schools but as well as private schools. Kasama din po dito. Kaya lahat po kailangan makinig sa DepEd Order na ito. Policy Statement. The Department upholds the principle of promoting the welfare, safety, and security of learners and personnel at all times, which remains the paramount consideration. So it is really the primary principle of the department to ensure the welfare, safety, and security of all learners and personnel. This policy aims to protect the physical and psychological welfare of learners, personnel, and their families by providing guidance on the following. Letter A, suspension of classes and work in times of disasters and emergencies. Letter B, interventions needed to address the impacts of disasters and the roles and responsibilities of all concerned. Guidelines, ito na po tayo sa meat ng DepEd Order na ito. Guidelines on the suspension of work and classes. Number 1, automatic cancellation, suspension of classes and work. So, cancellation and suspension of classes shall be based on the weather bulletin issued by the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical, and Astronomical Services Administration, commonly called as PAG-ASA, particularly the tropical cyclone wind signals as follows. So, itong PAG-ASA, pag mag-issue ng mga ganitong mga advisory, when tropical cyclone wind signal number 1, example, the weather disturbance is expected in 36 hours, is raised by PAG-ASA, public and private kindergarten classes, regardless of learning modality in the affected areas, shall be automatically cancelled or suspended. Ano ibig sabihin? So, whether you are face-to-face, pero wala namang face-to-face ngayon, whether you are face-to-face, online, or modular printed, modular digital, RBI, so lahat-lahat ng mga modalities, whether kahit anong modalities ka, basta may storm, tropical cyclone, wind signal number 1, canceled po lahat ng public at private kindergarten classes. And that should be emphasized and that should be noted. Teaching, school personnel, including ALS teachers, solely handling canceled or suspended classes, are not required to report regardless of working arrangements adopted by the school in consideration of the work service that they have to render during make-up classes. So, hindi na sila, pwede na silang hindi mag-report sa school ang mga teaching personnel, including ALS, yung mga nag-handle na mga suspended na classes. In this case, the kindergarten. The non-teaching school personnel, and schools division, regional and central office personnel shall be required to report to work under applicable working arrangement as determined by the concerned head of office, consistent with the relevant provisions of DepEd Order Number 11, Series of 2020, or yung tinatawag nating revised guidelines on alternative work arrangements in the Department of Education during the period of state of national emergency due to COVID-19 pandemic. So, yung mga non-teaching, pwede sila, talagang they are required to report kasi hindi naman pwedeng ma-deserve yung iba na mga services, especially with the salary and other benefits. So, kailangan silang mag-continue. Pero, subject to the alternative work arrangement. However, the concerned head of office is also given the authority to determine kung applicable ba ang working arrangement nila. So, importante din ang pag-evaluate ng situation ng corresponding head of office. Central, regional, schools division office, and teaching and or non-teaching school personnel who are members of DRRM teams shall continue to render the necessary services guided by the succeeding provisions on the activation of DRRM teams. Heads of private schools who may adopt the foregoing provisions shall exercise discretion on the appropriate work arrangement for their teaching and non-teaching personnel. So, the head of the private school may adopt and exercise discretion on the appropriate work arrangement of their teaching and non-teaching personnel. Sabihin niya na, we will follow the public, pero talaga namang they have to follow this. This provision is for this appropriate work arrangement of their teaching and non-teaching personnel. Pero no deal, no negotiation, non-negotiable na i-cancel talaga lahat ng classes, both in public and private. What we are talking here is the provision of the work arrangement of the personnel, consistent also with DepEd Order number 11, series of 2020. So that's why the private schools must also try to review this DepEd Order, because this is also applicable to all of you. Okay, letter B. When typhoon uh, typhoon cyclone wind signal, or number 2, is raised by Pag-asa, public and private kindergarten, both elementary and secondary, like junior and senior high school classes, regardless of learning delivery modality in the affected areas, shall be automatically cancelled or suspended. So kung number 2 na yung TCWS, number 2 na, of course, lahat ng kindergarten, elementary, and secondary, suspended po silang lahat. Teaching school personnel, including ALS teachers, solely handling cancelled or suspended classes, are not required to report to work, regardless of working arrangement adopted by the school in consideration of the work service that they have to render during makeup classes. It yung kung DepEd Order number 43 series of 2012, this was not clearly stated na hindi na sila mag-report, kasi misleading din yung, kasi pang face-to-face yung setting ng DepEd Order number 43 series of 2012. Ang sabi lang kasi doon, the teachers or employees may leave their station. Ang ibig sabihin ng may leave, ibig sabihin nandun sila tapos they will leave. Parang hindi na sila talaga directly sinasabi, and it causes many interpretations from among the personnel. Pero talagang dito sinasabi sa signal number 1 pa lang at signal number 2, all teaching school personnel are not to report on that date. Okay? Non-teaching school personnel and schools division, regional, and central office personnel shall be required to report under applicable working arrangements as determined by the concerned head of office, consistent with the relevant provisions of DepEd Order number 11, series of 2020. So, ibig sabihin, yung mga non-teaching with applicable working arrangement, they need to report also. But, ibig sabihin, they will follow their alternative working arrangement. So, kung wala pang alternative working arrangement na na-follow or na-set, so kailangan mag-set. And it should be duly approved by the concerned head of that certain division. Central Regional Schools Division Office and teaching and non-teaching school personnel who are members of the DRRM teams shall continue to render the necessary services guided by the succeeding provisions on the activation of the DRRM teams. Okay, that's self-explanatory. Heads of private schools who may adopt the foregoing provisions shall exercise discretion on the appropriate work arrangements for their teaching and non-teaching personnel. So katulad din sa previous signal number 1, so the school heads of private schools may use their discretion on the appropriate work arrangement of their teaching and non-teaching personnel. So pwede na lang report kasi discretion pwede rin hindi. Pwede nilang i-adapt. But, the non-negotiable is lahat talaga ng classes ng kindergarten, elementary, at saka junior high school and senior high school ay talagang canceled on this tropical signal. So, letter C, when the TCWS number 3 or the signal number 3 or higher pa, kasi may signal number 4 na, di ba? Weather disturbance is expected 18 hours or less is by Pag-asa. Classes in all levels, regardless of learning modalities, used by elementary and secondary schools, and work in all DepEd offices, regardless of work arrangement, in the affected areas shall be automatically cancelled or suspended. So, ibig sabihin, lahat ng work, pati sa mga offices, regardless of work arrangement, suspended. Basta signal number 3. Central Regional Schools Division Office and teaching and or non-teaching school personnel who are members of the DRRM teams shall continue to render the necessary services guided by the succeeding provisions on the activation of the DRRM teams. Heads of private schools exercise discretion relative to the arrangement of their DRRM personnel. Number 2, this is about the localized cancellation, bar suspension of classes, and work for natural and or human-induced calamities. So ito yung mga natural or human-induced calamities. Localized cancellation or suspension of classes and work due to natural and or human-induced calamities in both public and private schools, regardless of learning modality, and work in government offices, shall be at the discretion of local chief executives in their capacity as chairpersons of the Local Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. In case where only classes are suspended, non-teaching and teaching personnel including ALS solely handling cancelled or suspended classes are not required to report to their work regardless of working arrangement adopted by the school. For private schools, the school head shall exercise discretion relative to the reporting of their teaching and non-teaching personnel. Regional and schools division office personnel may be required to report to work under applicable working arrangements as determined by the regional director or schools division superintendent respectively. So, ibig sabihin, hindi pa rin mag-work o hindi pa rin mag-report ang mga teaching and teaching school personnel, including ALS teachers, pag sinuspend ng LGU because of some other calamities, yung classes. Kahit classes lang ang suspended. So, I hope that it is clear. Kasi noon, pag classes ang suspended, hindi klarong na-mention yung mga teachers or work, yung mga schools talaga, including the teachers, are not required to report. So, I hope that it is clear. However, regional schools division, teaching and or non-teaching school personnel who are members of the DRRM teams shall continue to render the necessary services guided by the succeeding provisions on the activation of the DRRM teams. In the event that face-to-face classes are already allowed, heads of schools, both public and private, and community learning centers may likewise cancel or suspend class done through face-to-face learning and on-site work when urgent action is needed to prevent loss of life or bodily harm. In such cases, they shall immediately inform the concerned schools division office and local government unit through the city or municipal DRRMC. So, kung nag-face-to-face classes na are allowed, pwede ring i-cancel ang suspend class through the face-to-face learning and on-site work when urgent action is needed. So, pwede pa rin siya. So, it comes across all level. Kung ano ang ibig sabihin ng DepEd Order na ito, pwede rin pa lang kung available na yung limited face-to-face classes. This policy is also applicable. The resumption of classes for LGU declared localized, cancellation, or suspension shall be decided by the local chief executive. Kadalasan, magkakaroon sila ng executive order on this, na suspended ang classes, then mag-resume na. Halimbawa, nag-suspend sila ng Monday, ano sila ng executive order, pagka Tuesday, pwede na lang ibalik. So, kailangan talaga mayroong cancellation and resumption order. Shall be decided by the local chief executive. Such resumption shall be made in coordination between the local chief executive and the school's division superintendent. Prior arrangements or agreements may be made between the school's division superintendent and the local chief executive to establish mechanisms and parameters on the resumption of classes consistent with governing laws, rules, and health and safety protocols, varying context, challenges, and readiness and safety of community or communities and offices shall be considered in the determination of the resumption of classes, which may differ for its learning delivery modality for school. So, dapat mayroong agreement si local chief executive as the school's division superintendent para ma-establish ang mechanisms and parameters on the resumption of classes consistent with all the laws. Okay. The resumption of classes cancelled or suspended by heads of schools shall be decided by the school's division superintendent upon the recommendation of the concerned school head with the local government unit. Ito, number 3. This is also very important. Adjustments to learning delivery due to suspensions. With reference to DepEd Order number 12, series of 2020, or the adoption of the Basic Education Learning Continuity Plan for school year 2020-2021, in light of the COVID-19 public health emergency, DepEd Memorandum 392, series of 2010, or the guidelines on giving homework or assignments, and OUCI Memorandum 307 series of 2020, or the suggested measures to foster academic ease during COVID-19. So, because of this, no, DepEd Order 12 series of 2020 o yung LCP at saka yung DepEd Memo 392 series of 2010 sa guidelines of giving homework should be guided or should be the basis for fostering academic ease during the COVID-19. Mayroon talaga academic ease, kaya nga mayroon tayong mga MELC, most essential learning competencies, yung mga most na essential pa. Di ba? So, grabe na pagpa-priority yon. Hindi lahat ng mga competencies ay gagamitin, but yung mga most essential learning competencies. So, talagang may academic ease because of this. It is suggested that learners may not be asked to engage in any school-related activities during class suspensions unless by and through their own initiative. It is very important, tandaan sa lahat ng mga kaguruan, lahat ng mga principals at division officials, kung nag-suspend ng classes, huwag magbigay ng sangkatutak ng mga activities. Kaya hindi natin alam na yung mga bahay-bahay ng ating mga mag-aaral ay biktima rin ng mga calamities na ito. So, hindi sila makapag-focus. So, unless lang kung initiative nila talaga yung paggawa ng kanilang mga activities sa school, kung may mga pending sila before, especially on their modules. However, to ensure conveyance of the most essential learning competencies, the following are suggested adjustment options to be done by teachers with the assistance of school learning support aids or LSAs. Ang tawag pala ng ating mga learning support aids ay LSAs, and facilitators in the implementation of classes across delivery modalities. So, ito yung mga suggested adjustment options. So, letter A, designing flexible assessment tools that respond to shortened time allotment in adherence to DepEd Order number 31 series of 2020 or the interim policy in assessing and grading in the light of BE-LCP. Ito yung isa sa mga considerations natin. Yung DepEd Order number 31, yung interim policy in the assessment. The second one is upgrading the weekly home learning plan that emphasizes the essential activities that must be prioritized due to class suspension. So, itong weekly home learning plan, dapat updated ito. So, lahat ng mga nasa portion na nandyan should be updated. Planning for remediation strategies must be based on individual learners monitoring plan or ILMP results. So, the planning for remediation, it should be from the learning needs or learning monitoring plan from the learners. Letter D, planning for enhancement activities for learners who are struggling, coping, needing special care or attention, or any valid situation where considerations may be applied. So, pwede ring enhancement activities for those who are struggling, na nag-struggle sila talaga. Kasi mahirap naman talaga, no, pag hindi independent learner, mag-comply sa mga activities ngayon. Kaya lang, we have no choice talaga. That's why we really have to implement this. So, communicating learners' progress to parents, and extending psychosocial support whenever is possible. Yung health and nutrition section, sila yung head ng mga pagbibigay ng psychosocial learner support as well as the advisor kasi kinascade na sa kanila yung mga different techniques in extending psychosocial support to the learners. DepEd Order number 43, series of 2012, states that makeup classes shall be held on Saturdays or on weekdays beyond the originally set school calendar in both public and private schools to except the days when classes are cancelled or suspended. However, the school year 2020-2021, Saturdays have been considered as part of the 205 total days due to the deferral of the opening of classes. Hence, in the exigencies of the current learning setup and class suspensions brought about by various disruptions, those who miss distance learning classes shall be accorded due to consideration in the accomplishment of their learning tasks by extending the time frame for their completion and submission with the duration of the current quarter. Kasi nga, hindi ka na makapag-make up ng Saturday. Halimbawa, na-suspend ang classes because of some calamities. Paano ka pa mag-make up ka sa Saturday? Yung Saturday nga, part na siya sa school days. So, hindi lang alam ng marami na yung Saturdays, counted na yon sa 205 class days kasi matagal tayo masyado nag-open ng classes, di ba? For this school year, October na tayo nagsimula na mag-klase instead of June. So, yung Saturday, ginawa na yon, na kinount na yon sa number of days kasi para mako-cope up yung 205. So, hindi ka na pwedeng mag-make up class dyan. So, ang gagawin mo is i-extend yung time frame ng completion and submission ng current quarter. Pag-submit nila ng mga kanilang mga activities. In addition, they shall be provided, may B po dyan, with additional reading materials, other supplementary learning resources, and appropriate assessment to check whether they have met the targeted learning competencies. So, magbibigyan ng mga enhancement or additional reading materials. Maintenance of workforce and activation of DRRM teams. So, central, regional, and schools division offices and schools shall activate their DRRM teams to prepare, monitor, and respond to the situation while strictly adhering or abiding by existing COVID-19 required health standards. DRRM team members, particularly DRRM coordinator and engineers, shall be required to work in the aftermath of the disaster to continue undertaking response, early recovery, and reporting based on established DRRM protocols. Or they may also conduct post-disaster needs assessment and inspection of school facilities to vet damage as reported. So, kailangan talaga yung workforce natin and activation ng DRRR team, they are there, but they are requested to observe health protocols and standards. The school DRRM coordinators and detailed assessment of damaged facilities for purposes of developing the program of works for infrastructure, costing in rehabilitation, and recovery plans in coordination meeting with LDRRMCs. Other DRRM team members may likewise be required to report to work as needed. In view of the emergency response services rendered during the period of work, cancellation or suspension, concerned personnel shall be entitled to service credits. Wow! So bibigyan sila ng service credits in lieu of their reporting to disaster. So that will be done through the issuance of a memorandum and the completion of some documents. So mabibigyan sila ng service credits. They're entitled to service credits. Or overtime payment. So kadalasan hindi naman talaga tayo nag-grant ng overtime payment kasi nga kulang nga tayo sa funds. So kadalasan yung binibigay yung service credits. Pursuant to DepEd Order number 53, series of 2003, or the updated guidelines on grant of vacation service credits to teachers, which grants teaching personnel credits for services rendered during calamities and rehabilitation when schools are used as evacuation centers, and DepEd Order number 30, series of 2016, guidelines on the rendition and payment of overtime services for DepEd non-teaching personnel, which allows for the rendition of overtime services for relief, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and other related work or services during calamities and disasters by non-teaching personnel and other relevant policies subject to guidelines set by the Civil Service Commission and the Department of Budget and Management. Siguro kung may overtime pay, kakaunti lang yon, no? Kasi nag-house nga tayo sa mga funds natin, di ba? Yung mga maraming funds na nagdaratingan, pagbili lang din natin ng mga supplies and materials for other production of modules. Kaya sana nga mag-shift na tayo sa digital para long-term yung solusyon. Kasi yung printed modality, itatapon lang din man yan pag hindi na masyado magagamit kasi disposable siya. Heads of private schools shall exercise discretion relative to the work arrangements of their DRRM personnel. So yung private schools din, kailangan din mag-appoint ng kanilang DRRM personnel. Then the conduct of psychological first aid as the maintenance of a conducive learning environment requires addressing the immediate needs of affected learners and personnel in the aftermath of disasters. All schools division offices shall conduct an assessment and determine the needs for appropriate psychological first aid activities and leads its implementation when deemed necessary. So dapat mayroong conduct of psychological first aid. Kasi yung iba nasa shop, di ba? Mga learners or personnel sa aftermath of the disasters, natulala yung iba, parang na-trauma yung iba. So, kailangan talagang may psychological first aid. This shall include the mobilization of the trained PFA providers and, if needed, referral pathways for learners and personnel identified for further specialized psychological support services. Required health standards shall be applied at all times. And then, this one is very important also. The responsibilities or responsibility of parents and guardians. The Department of Education still maintains that parents and guardians have the ultimate responsibility for determining their children should proceed with their studies through any learning delivery modalities in consideration of their physical and or mental health. So, nasa parents pa rin talaga nakasalalay kung ipagpapaaralin ba o papahintuin, kasi nakadepende sa kakayahan ng mga kabataan. So, responsibilities po yan ng mga parents and guardians. Parents and guardians are advised to check for media advisories coming from Pag-asa, NDRRMC, RDRRMCs, LDRRMCs, or the Office of the President himself. Kailangan mapagmatsyag ang mga magulang kasi sila talaga ang magde-decide. Baka naman i-blame nila sa mga guro o anong mga mangyayari. Kailangan ikaw ang primary responsibility for your children. Okay? This is monitoring and evaluation. So, yun lang po. Maraming salamat. I hope na marami kayong naintindihan sa session natin ngayong hapon o ngayong araw na ito. At sana ay nakatulong ito sa inyong pag-prepare sa National Qualifying Examination for School Heads. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay po kayong lahat. It is my fervent prayer that all of you will pass, those who are listening, by God's grace and providence and guidance. Mukhang may extend po yata ito kasi matatapos ng second quarter. Kasi sa advisory ni Yusik Jess, di ba, sabi niya, second quarter i-announce yung pagkakaroon ng principal's test, kaya lang hindi pa masyadong stable ang ating sitwasyon. So I think it might be on the next quarter or maybe on the last quarter or maybe next year. So, mag-prepare lang po lagi tayo kasi mas maigi na po yung prepared po tayong lahat. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikinig. Mabuhay po kayong lahat at sana ay pumasa lahat ng mga nakikinig sa pamamagitan ng inyong pananampalataya at pagmamahal ng Diyos sa inyo. Because I always believe there is always time for everything. God bless at mabuhay po kayong lahat.